Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Well, welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much for joining in today. So today we're going to be talking with Dr. Deborah Wirtzfeld, and I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So I am a retired surgical oncologist and executive healthcare administrator. I've worked in many places, Newfoundland and Labrador, Winnipeg, Manitoba, as well as most recently for Alberta Health Services. Currently, I am an executive coach and consultant, mostly around career transitions and optimizing performance in whatever professional role you may find yourself in.
Ah, perfect. Love that. So tell us about you and your journey through medicine. How was that for you?
So that's a long journey, starting many years ago. And so I originally trained in Calgary at the University of Calgary and thought I wanted to be a gastroenterologist, but fell in love with surgery when I did it.
Mhm.
Subsequently with surgical oncology. My journey through medicine has been quite varied. As I said, I've practiced in many locations, including in the States where I did some of my training. I feel that my journey has been one that has really been, a rise to the next challenge, if you will. And so really looking for opportunities both clinically, administratively, and truly loved being an academic physician, the education, resident exposure. I think my journey in medicine has been, as a surgeon, has been tempered by environments and culture. But I've met, a lot of great people who've helped me along that journey, have been fantastic mentors. One of the things that is really important to me and that people should know about me is that I am a single parent. I chose to be a single parent. And so I have two sons who are 16 and 21, who have always really been the focus of how I organize my practice. And so I've been very determined, even though busy clinically and administratively, to make sure that they are the main focus around which I establish my priorities and my boundaries and build my surgical practice. So those are a few things I would say about my journey, my
Mm.
surgical journey.
Yeah, that's really interesting and important that you brought forward priorities and boundaries because as a
Mhm.
surgeon, they're going to have a lot of difficulty maintaining priorities and boundaries sometimes.
Yes.
Tell us about the culture that you noticed that was difficult, that you said you had some mentoring for. Tell us about that.
So I would say that the culture of surgery has changed a lot in the last 30 years since I've been involved in it. And there's other fields besides surgery that are like this, obviously. That idea that you're in an apprentice type model, and that you work consistently. The only trouble with being on call every second night is that you miss half of the cases. I think that is one that we have really gotten past. The culture, I think, over the last 10 years has been one where, we've really been in a space where there's been such progress that people who trained and worked during my time have a lot of difficulty seeing where it's going. And I coach a lot of people in many different types of specialties in medicine. So it's not just surgical. Where is it going to? Where is the apprentice model developing to? Where is the responsibility? So surgery is male dominated, as many other specialties are. I didn't really find this to be a particular issue in a lot of areas. It did come out in some places, I would say mostly with patients.
Mhm.
Some patients had difficulties understanding that I wasn't the surgeon and they would be waiting for the surgeon to come in the room. But always handling that, I think, for the most part, in a respectful manner. So I think the culture is changing. I think the culture of all of medicine is changing. And that's part of what I'm doing as an executive coach, is helping people understand that there is an ability to set boundaries. There is an ability to develop a career which aligns with who you are.
Got it. Okay, that's really important. So you were still doing surgical services when you had your small children, is that correct?
Oh, yes.
And what about like things like income and negotiating on call within your group? Do you think that you were the same or disadvantaged or advantaged for these outside priorities outside
So
of medicine?
right. There were a few things that I did. Wherever I practiced across Canada, I tried to get into a group which was very understanding and wanted the same things that I did. So one
Yeah.
of the fabulous groups of people I had an opportunity to work with was my final clinical practice in surgical oncology in Winnipeg, where there were four of us. And we would get together once or twice a year and we would say, who has what priorities and what does that look like for our group clinical time? For example, when I was the president of the Canadian Association of General Surgeons, that was a year that took a lot of administrative responsibilities, and I cut back my clinical practice, and my partners took on more.
Mhm.
And I may have done that in other aspects for them when they took on more. So having that type of practice, that trust, that ability to function as a group, if you will. The other thing I would say, I have lectured a lot over the years on work-life balance. I now call it integration.
Mhm.
And the most important thing I ever say to them is that when you are part of a committee or you have meetings, any meetings that run over an hour, make sure you understand why. And
Mhm.
that allowed me to go to my department chairs, especially when I had section head responsibilities, and say, this meeting is an hour. It's scheduled for an hour. At the end of an hour, you'll see me put my coat on and go to leave because I have to leave. And so there was that respectful discourse. But other people had said to me, that limiting meetings to an hour, or if you're on a committee and a year from now you're discussing the same things, you have to ask yourself, is this committee really worth my time? So really trying to align what you need to do and how you need to get ahead with your other priorities, and not being afraid to have a conversation about them.
Yeah. Oh, I like that because meetings are so expensive when you consider
Mm.
all the people in the room. The rest of our life doesn't stop just because we're in a meeting. We've still got things coming into the in basket, if nothing else, right? So there's so much buying for our time that we really have to pay attention when it comes
Yeah.
to meeting together. I really like that perspective.
Yes, a meeting needs a purpose.
Yes. And even that perspective of if we're still talking about the same thing in a year, that is so valuable.
Mm-hmm. Because you're not getting anywhere.
You're not getting
You're
anywhere. I've
repeating yourself.
certainly been in those situations. I'm like, hmm.
Yes. Mhm.
God, what made you want to be, or maybe you didn't want to be, but you ended up head of, what was it, the Canadian Surgeons
Yeah,
Association?
Canadian Association of General Surgeons. I had done some work on the Council of the Canadian Association of General Surgeons, and a great mentor, Dr. Susan Reed, previous first female chair of surgery in Canada, saw potential in me and asked me if I would be willing to take on the role. It was a many-year role because you become the president-elect and then the president and then the past president. But it was a phenomenal experience. And seeing all my colleagues who were doing such fabulous things, both academically, but as well, as we've talked some about their personal and professional lives and how they were really thriving. It was really a great few years.
Okay, yeah, because that is a big time commitment for you. I'm so curious about this meeting with my colleagues twice a year to talk about our priorities and
Mhm.
boundaries. How did that come about?
Well, when I first started in Winnipeg, there was some shift in the people who worked in the Department of Surgical Oncology. And because of a number of things that happened, eventually it was just myself and Dr. Ethel McIntosh, a very valuable and valued colleague of mine. And we worked really hard for a couple of years. And we intentionally hired with the intent that we were going to make things better and that
Hmm.
we were going to, work to strive to have a cohesive group. I mean, she as well had other priorities outside of surgery. And uh, the other two people that we hired obviously were a generation or maybe more below us. And so they had these priorities coming in, and we saw this in the upcoming generations of surgery. And so, we practice the way we do, not because we have to, but because we think we have to. And so there's many valuable options open to us.
Give us an example of that, because I think that's a really important statement there, that we practice in this way because we think we have to. Tell us an example of what was like a before and after, or what was something that you noticed that you didn't have to keep doing.
Well, I think it was a very dynamic relationship. And so, I mean, if we were on call for the weekend, we were on call for the group. And so that was something when I had come from Newfoundland and Labrador. Originally, when I arrived in Newfoundland and Labrador after practicing in Buffalo, New York for several years, I walked in and I said, "Who's covering for the weekend?" And they said, "We don't cover each other's patients." And I said to my chair about 3 months in, you realize that there is 120 years of postgraduate education in here on the single Saturday we get for summer in Newfoundland. And subsequent to that time, I was moved to the other hospital where we cross-covered each other. So, I had always had in my mind, even before I had my children, that there had to be a way to do this that supported both professional expertise and caring for patients,
Yes.
uh, and also supporting wellness and what you need in your personal life.
Hmm. It's
Hmm.
interesting that there are still models of care where you're not given the weekend off from your patients who are in hospital under you. And I likewise have never worked in a place where I had to still look after my patients on the weekend. We would hand off to colleagues, but knowing that that's a skill set to be able to hand off to somebody else and trust that they will do that care for you in your absence. I mean, that's a skill set that we may not recognize that we can do for each other.
Right. And I think that's one way of doing it. When I worked in Newfoundland, my partner, there was two surgical oncologists. He wouldn't hand over his patients. So he would do every weekend and I would take every second weekend off. And so, it really is trying to mix it together so that we have what people really want. But I think that even seeing models like this, people who might not have thought it was possible then see it is possible and move into, as you say, the skill set that it requires to make it work.
Mhm. Tell us about annual leave and your ability to, what would be some of the things that would happen there in terms of looking after each other's patients in baskets, results, things like that?
So, that was interesting because that has evolved over time. Obviously, we didn't initially have electronic systems for that. And so, I mean, it's run the whole gamut for me, depending on what my supports have been. Sometimes when I have been away, I have checked in once or twice a week. My assistants have always known where I am.
Hmm.
And I have had the opportunity to work with some fabulously skilled assistants who could take care of most of what I wanted them to. Again, as you say, this is a skill set to allow people to do this rather
Hmm.
than, micromanaging everything. And so I would really make sure, set aside time before I went away with my assistant, try to think about things that might come up,
Hmm.
and then check in once or twice. If people have the ability and know that they can contact you, if they need to, they're unlikely to do it. But it provides that safety net and it would happen from time to time. as I said, I practiced with Ethel McIntosh for a number of years before we hired other people, and we were very much in the space where we practiced the same, we could hand off to each other. So I think it really was a mix of different approaches.
And you're right, it does evolve over time, but just knowing that it's possible. Because I
Mhm.
hear a lot of physicians saying, it's been years since I had a day off. It's been years since I didn't check my EMR even once a day. And that understanding that even
Yes.
in oncology surgical teams, it's possible, right?
Well, it is possible. I don't know what the advent of the EMR system will do. I mean, that is a focus of part of my executive coaching is around things such as email, and the EMR is part of that. It has really allowed um, access to physicians 24/7. And
Mhm.
so I think it's even more of an intrusion into our personal space than when I trained, because there was designated times you were away from the hospital.
Mhm.
Now there is not designated times. I remember one of my colleagues saying, I love the advent of this because it means that I can do my charts, you know, in the morning when I'm eating breakfast. And I just sat there and went, could you say that again? Because really, that's not what we're aiming for. And so I think we have to really evolve how we handle electronic records because they are I think, a significant bane of the existence of physicians currently.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree.
Well,
Tell
you
us
do a
about
lot of work in that space. Sorry, you do a
yeah,
lot of
yeah, that's one of the things that I love to do
yeah,
is to kind of question and challenge the 24-hour access,
yeah.
right? And say,
Right.
if you don't guard your time, because no one else will.
Right, and that's what we have emergency departments for. But we need to be better structured in how we manage off hours patient access to healthcare besides emergency departments.
Yeah,
It's a system-wide thing we need to be thinking about as well.
agree. Yeah. Tell us about your move into administrative spaces. Um, why and what did you do?
Hmm. So I have the personality, I think, that aligns with administration. When I was a surgical resident, I did some time in rural areas thinking, I just want to practice patient care. But it quickly helped me focus on the fact that I was an academic and I was an administrator. Into major administrative roles, I was the provincial lead for surgical oncology when I was recruited to Winnipeg about 6 years into my surgical practice. And then I became the surgical lead for general surgery over time and was recruited to Alberta Health Services as the Associate Chief Medical Officer for Physician Health, Diversity, and Leadership Development. All of this was flavored by the fact that I have a very significant passion for leadership development. And this came about when I was interviewing in Winnipeg, and one of the people interviewing me said, I don't think you have what it takes to be the leader of surgical oncology. And I took that as a suggestion that maybe I needed to do more leadership development, and I was able to negotiate in my contract leadership development as part of my growth for that role. So I really love the administrative space. I think we have to really align what we do with who we are. And I'm that person that everybody says, oh, who wants to be doing that administrative stuff? Who wants to go over to the dark side? And I'd be the one putting up my hand saying, yes, that's me. You guys do your stuff and I'll do this stuff because I like it. So that's, an overview of my journey through administrative
Yeah.
medicine.
Tell us some of the things that you were working on that gave you passion in this space. What were you looking to improve or change about the system? What sort of wins did you have or did you want to pursue?
So I would say that the greatest win that I had was when I became section head for general surgery. Our residency program was on intent to withdraw, and I'd been doing a lot in the study of leadership development, and I had a phenomenal team around me. We didn't always agree, but the general surgeons were phenomenal people. great surgeons, and we were able to take some of those concepts and, ask ourselves who we were as individuals and what we meant to the system, and we really grew as a team. So I see that as a significant success in that area of administration. I have a passion for developing teams and for developing individuals. Medicine is an interesting space because once we get into medical school, we follow this space, which we don't have to do much over a number of years. You're a student and then you choose a specialty, residency position, and then you go into your first practice. Usually you flow into it for most people. And then about 6 or 7 years in, there's that, how do I develop myself? What does the rest of my career look like? How do I fit into my team? And I think we don't have necessarily the skills to do that in a direct and proactive way. So that was always my passion, is how do we build to the next level? How do we bring empowered performance out of people, make them their best? I just love that space.
Nice. It may or may not be something that you're, depending on where you are in the administrative world, but what about the healthcare systems in Canada, wait times for surgeries? Is there, from your perspective within administrative circles, do you think that there is progress towards improving healthcare systems so that we are looking at both physician and patient objectives? Do you think that there is good work being done?
I think there's good work that's being done in siloed spaces. And one of the areas that's very intriguing to me is some work that's being done by David Urbach and his colleagues in Ontario. We've known for a while that referrals tend to be generated by relationships. And so they're not generated necessarily by skill level. So I think that the idea of centralized access to procedures, but also centralized OR time. So we did a lot of this work when I was with the Cancer Patient Journey Project in Winnipeg, where we did focus groups with patients, and we said, once you meet the surgeon, if you know your surgery is going to be in 4 weeks, will you do your surgery in 4 weeks for cancer, or will you do it sooner, say in 1 week, if you can have it done by a different surgeon? And almost unanimously, once they'd met that surgeon, they chose 4 weeks. And so Dave Urbach has been doing some interesting stuff around not only centralized referrals, but also first surgeon available. And so I think it is really in putting those resources into, what is it that we really need in the system, and how do we coordinate it so that we have access for those people who truly need access? Um, we have had provinces where, when they went from a fee-for-service model to an alternate payment system, certain types of surgeries have gone down, such as hernia surgery, which we know now you can have a watch and wait approach to. So I think it really is, you know, our responsibility to try to figure out, are there systems that will work better for patients. I think orthopedics has done some of this with hip and joint. Part of it is resource dependent and how many resources we have, but part of it is also management of the system and how we get people through the system. It's a difficult, very difficult question.
I know, and that's what high level, complex, difficult problems are, right?
Yeah, it's a wicked problem.
Wicked problems. There isn't going to be a solution. Was
Yeah,
curious that, having been in some of those circles, that you're probably observing some of that difficult and wicked problem being hashed out, and thinking about all the parties involved and all the moving pieces. There's a
right.
lot going on. But it's just nice to know that there's work going on behind there. Yeah.
Right. And there's also independent surgical facilities in several provinces now. And I think it's incumbent upon us to determine what are the standards by which these facilities are going to operate.
Hmm.
So that's part of the system too. It's not
Mhm.
separate from. Yes.
Yeah, agreed. Perfect. Tell us about some of the things that you're noticing or working with physicians in regards to creating more sustainable workflows for themselves or sustainable clinical practice.
So I think part of that work is through identifying truly what they want to see for themselves. And so for a lot of physicians, as I alluded to, they have this sort of journey of wandering till they're about 6 or 7 years out into their career. And there are multiple roads they could take, but if you don't know where you're going, you don't know what you need to do. And so I'm a really strong believer in that idea that the daily habits that you do will determine where you go. So, if you can have a vision for yourself 2 years, 3 years down the road, it doesn't have to be 20 years. Um, and then you can think about what it would actually take to get there. And that includes not only what habits you need to take on, it includes what habits you need to get rid of. Because as physicians, especially women physicians, I think we tend to take on more things, but not get rid of things that don't really serve where we're going. And so, in working with some people, consolidation of clinic time so that they're able to open up new space to do other things, the ability to know what they need to ask for in order to get to a particular space. I think people feel sometimes if they go and talk to their chair or their lead and say, I'm looking to do this, that the chair will just say, okay, well, then you'll need this, 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 and this. But the people who actually tend to get what they need because chairs and leaders have limited time, or those people have a clear plan and can go and say, I need to do this, I'm working towards this, and have it always out there as what they're doing and not scattered about. So it's really formulating a plan, a direction that the person can communicate repeatedly to people so that everyone is aligned with where they want to go.
Okay, perfect. And then with regards to talking with your colleagues, building those um, relationships with your colleagues in terms of what are we prioritizing? How could we change our workflows? Where would people start if they were interested in that idea?
Obviously, I'm biased towards working with a coach. Um, I think, talking to people, I always say there are things you can do. You just need some time and space to think about them. So freeing up maybe 20 minutes of your day to just think about these things. Talk to people whom you see who have a practice or something that is where you aim to go. You're not starting in a fishbowl. Reach out through social media groups, through others, and say, I'm thinking of this. The other thing is, and the first thing I said was working with a coach, and I laugh, but I think it's just someone to bounce things off of. Currently, I work with the Canadian Physician Coaches Network. I'm on their board. That's where you and I know each other. We obviously both feel there is a strength in that ability for someone to come in objectively and listen and say, hey, have you thought of this, or what would that look like for you to consider what your true strengths are in a workflow? What is it that is and is not working, and what do you have the ability to control, and what can you influence by talking to others? So I think it really is a process of really working with someone else to envision things and then to, again, really work on a plan. It's not that it's not flexible, but I think I really am amazed by some of the great things people have done through working with coaches, myself, and others.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. Where would people find you if they're interested in doing some more work with you?
So people can find me through my website, which is www.sheknowsshift. You see it, I think, in the background that I have, sheknowsshift.com. They can also find me through the Canadian Physician Coaches Network website, which is Coach for MD, coach the number 4, md.org. Those are probably the two best places for people to find me. Always open to a great conversation.
Excellent. Anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about today?
I think that people need to give themselves compassion for where they are. Physicians have this space of always being very hard on themselves, reflecting that if I'm not perfect, that it wasn't done right. I think this type of work in finding a journey, finding a transition, a workflow, as you say, it really sits with having compassion for yourself, that you are deserving of this and you can do this. There is space for this to be done. So when I say the word compassion to clients, it has a very powerful effect on them because I don't think they've ever thought about having compassion for themselves, although they may be having it every day for patients and others in the healthcare environment. So having that compassion is so important.
Yeah. And knowing that there, even within the place you are right now, there could be a different way, a different workflow available. You could achieve some of the priorities that you're interested in prioritizing for yourself, even here. I hear a lot of people wanting to move or change career or place because what they have right now isn't working for them.
Yeah.
But just knowing that, having a conversation, having a think about what is it that I want and can I achieve it here? Or do I
Yes.
need to move? Like, even that conversation is very powerful because you may feel stuck, like there is no option. I am kind of stuck here and it's hopeless. And that may or may not be true.
Yeah, I've worked with many clients who have come to me with the intention of moving on. And after coaching, they've recognized through gaining that power, uh, of being able to put forward a vision that they can have what they want where they are. And so it really is that reflection, as you say, on where I need to go. And it, as you're talking, it really reminds me of a quote. In medicine, we tend to think a lot about what others think about us. And there's a great Dr. Seuss quote that goes, "Those who care don't matter, and those who matter don't care." So those who really matter in your life, they don't care what you do, right? So when you're thinking about these things, you have to think about those people who really have your vested interests at heart, and they should be the network that you're working with to move forward. So
Yeah,
love that.
I love that too. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this conversation and
Thank you,
have a
Sarah.
wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.